Have you ever witnessed a moment so powerful it left you speechless? We'd love to hear from you. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. We're always amazed by how far our stories travel. And if this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have an incredible story dropping tomorrow that you won't want to miss. Trust us, it's one of the most unforgettable ones yet. See you in the next story. A boy's silent plea left the guards speechless. 7-year-old Lucas Carter walked through the quiet, solemn grounds of Arlington National Cemetery, his small fingers clutching a faded photograph. The towering white headstones stretched endlessly before him, each one marking a life dedicated to service. But Lucas wasn't here just to visit. He had a mission, a deep, unspoken hope that had led him to this exact spot. His mother, Emily Carter, walked beside him, her steps slow and careful. She knew this visit meant more to Lucas than any other trip they had taken. Today, he wasn't just a boy visiting a historic site. He was a son searching for a connection to the father he had never truly known. Sergeant David Carter had been a soldier, a man of honor, courage, and sacrifice. He had served with pride in the U.S. Army Honor Guard, standing tall, unwavering in his duty. But he never came home from his final mission. Lucas had heard the stories, seen the folded flag that sat on their mantel, and watched as his mother wiped away quiet tears when she thought no one was looking. But no matter how many stories were told, Lucas still felt the emptiness, the lingering question of what it would have been like to have his father by his side. As they reached the tomb of the unknown soldier, Lucas stopped. In front of him stood the honor guard, strong, disciplined, and motionless. The soldier's uniform was crisp, his stance perfect, his rifle held with absolute precision. To most, he was just part of a ceremony, a symbol of duty and respect. But to Lucas, he was something more. He was a reflection of the father he never got to meet, a living embodiment of the values his dad had stood for. Lucas swallowed hard, his grip tightening around the photograph. He wanted to say something, to ask if this soldier had ever known his father, if he had ever heard his name. But as he took a small step forward, his voice caught in his throat. The words felt too heavy. Instead, he did the only thing he could think of. He gently placed the photograph at the guard's feet. Emily watched as her son stood there, silent, waiting. Her heart ached for him. She wanted to pull him close, to tell him that his father's memory was alive, even if no one spoke his name. But Lucas wasn't looking for words. He was searching for something deeper, a sign that his father had not been forgotten. Staff Sergeant Ethan Miller stood at his post, his expression unreadable, his posture unshakable. The Arlington sun cast long shadows over the cemetery, stretching across the endless rows of headstones. He had stood here countless times before, never breaking his composure, never acknowledging the world beyond his duty. That was what it meant to be part of the honor guard: precision, discipline, unwavering presence. But today, something was different. At his feet lay a photograph, a small, worn picture placed there by a boy no older than 7. Ethan had seen him approach, his tiny hands trembling as he clutched the image, his eyes searching for something, anything, that would make him feel connected to the father he had lost. Ethan didn't move. He couldn't. His training, his years of experience, demanded stillness. The crowd around them sensed the weight of the moment. The usual murmurs of tourists faded, replaced by hushed anticipation. Some reached for their phones, ready to capture even the slightest movement, while others simply watched, holding their breath. Lucas Carter stood just feet away, his wide eyes locked onto Ethan's, waiting for something. Some sign that his father, Sergeant David Carter, wasn't forgotten. Emily Carter, standing a few steps behind her son, placed a protective hand on his shoulder. "Lucas, honey," she whispered, "we should go." But Lucas didn't move. He didn't cry, didn't plead. Instead, he did something even more heartbreaking. His voice, quiet but steady, broke the silence. "My dad was brave, just like you." The words hit harder than any command Ethan had ever received. He felt the weight of his rifle, the heat of the uniform pressing against his skin. Every instinct screamed at him to remain still, to follow protocol. But for the first time in his career, his resolve wavered. Beneath the rigid discipline, Ethan was still a man. A man who had served with soldiers like Sergeant David Carter. A man who had lost friends, watched families grieve, and carried the weight of duty far beyond the uniform. And now, standing before him, was a boy who just wanted to know that his father's sacrifice meant something. The air around them felt impossibly still. And then, in a moment that defied everything he had been trained to do, something happened. A single tear, small yet profound, slipped from the corner of Ethan's eye. It was fleeting, almost imperceptible, but in that moment, it was everything. The tear was barely visible, just the smallest glint of moisture rolling down Staff Sergeant Ethan Miller's face. But Lucas Carter saw it. His breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected a hug, a handshake, or even a word, just something, anything, to show that his father wasn't forgotten. And now, he had it. The moment passed in an instant, but the weight of it settled over the crowd like a heavy silence. No one spoke. No one dared to break the spell. Even the tourists who had been eager to capture a rare moment of movement from the honor guard hesitated, their cameras held still, as if sensing they were witnessing something sacred. Lucas's small fingers twitched at his sides. His mother, Emily, saw the way his chest rose and fell, the way his lips parted as if to say something, but no words came. She wanted to pull him back, to protect him from disappointment, but it was too late. The moment had already changed everything. Ethan Miller stood frozen in place, his pulse hammering in his ears. He hadn't meant for it to happen. He had spent years training to be unshakable, to bury his emotions beneath layers of discipline. But the boy's quiet voice, the way he had gently placed that photograph at his feet, had unraveled something deep inside him. He thought of his own brothers in arms, the ones who never made it home. He thought of the folded flags handed to grieving families, the silence that followed their sacrifice. And in that second, the rules didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the boy standing before him, waiting for something more. The crowd remained deathly still, waiting, expecting. But Ethan knew there was nothing else he could do. He had already given more than he should have. His body stiffened, his jaw locked, and his expression returned to stone. He had broken character for the briefest moment, and that was already enough to set the world buzzing. Lucas, however, didn't seem disappointed. His eyes remained locked onto Ethan's, a quiet understanding passing between them. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "I saw it. That's all I needed." Emily placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered. Lucas bent down, carefully picking up the photograph. He held it to his chest and took a step back. The moment was over, but neither of them would ever forget it. That night, Staff Sergeant Ethan Miller sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at his hands. His uniform was neatly folded beside him, his boots polished to perfection. Everything around him was in order, except his thoughts. No matter how much he tried to push it away, the image of the boy at his feet, the weight of his quiet words, and the single tear he had let slip refused to leave him. Breaking character, even for a moment, was unheard of in the honor guard. He had spent years perfecting the art of stillness, mastering the ability to shut out everything but duty. But today, for the first time in his career, he had failed. Or had he? A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. He straightened his back, preparing for whatever was coming. Was it a reprimand? Had someone higher up noticed? He exhaled sharply and opened the door. A young officer stood there, his expression neutral. "There's someone here for you." Ethan frowned. "For me?" The officer nodded. "A boy and his mother. They asked for you by name." For a moment, Ethan didn't move. Then, without a word, he followed the officer down the hall to the small reception area. As soon as he stepped inside, he saw them. Lucas Carter stood beside his mother, his small hands gripping a neatly folded envelope. His eyes lit up the moment he saw Ethan, but there was no excitement, no nervousness, just quiet certainty. He stepped forward and held out the letter. "It's from me," Lucas said softly, "and from my dad." Ethan hesitated. He had spent years keeping his emotions locked away, knowing that the smallest crack in his discipline could shake the foundation of everything he had built. But now, standing before this boy, he found himself reaching out, taking the envelope with careful hands. Emily offered a grateful smile. "We just wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to acknowledge him, but you did. And that meant everything." Ethan swallowed hard. He looked down at the envelope, his name written in uneven, childlike letters. He had received awards, commendations, and certificates of honor, but somehow this small letter felt heavier than all of them combined. Lucas took a step back, waiting, watching. Ethan's grip tightened around the envelope. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what to say, but deep inside, he knew. This moment had changed him forever. That night, Ethan Miller sat alone in his barracks, the letter resting in his hands. He hadn't opened it yet. Something about it felt heavier than paper, heavier than the uniform he wore every day. The words written by a 7-year-old boy carried more weight than any command he had ever received. With a steady breath, he carefully unfolded the letter. The handwriting was uneven, the lines slightly crooked, but the words hit him like a bullet, straight to the chest. Dear Staff Sergeant Miller, my name is Lucas Carter, and I'm 7 years old. Today I saw you cry. Mom said it was just a little, but I saw it, and I know it was for my dad. I just wanted to tell you that I think you are brave. Not just because you wear a uniform, but because you didn't pretend like my dad didn't matter. Some people don't talk about him anymore, but you remembered, and that means a lot. I don't know if guards are allowed to smile, but I hope you smiled today, even just a little. Thank you for being a soldier like my dad. Your friend, Lucas Carter. Ethan exhaled sharply and ran a hand over his face. He had spent years training to be an unmovable force, believing that discipline meant shutting out the world. But this boy, this 7-year-old, had just reminded him of something he had long forgotten. Strength wasn't about standing still. It was about knowing when to move. The next morning, Ethan woke early. His routine was the same, his uniform crisp, his boots polished, his posture perfect. But today, something was different. He reached into his locker and carefully placed Lucas's letter inside, tucking it away next to his most valued possessions. It wasn't just a letter. It was a reminder, a promise. Later that day, as he stood at his post, the crowd gathered as usual, cameras flashing, voices murmuring. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw them, Lucas and his mother, standing near the gates. The boy was searching the line of guards, his small face filled with hope. Ethan didn't move, not yet. But as Lucas's eyes met his, he made a decision. With precise, deliberate control, he adjusted his rifle, just slightly. To anyone else, it was nothing, a routine movement. But to Lucas, it was everything. The boy smiled, a small, knowing smile. Ethan stood tall, his gaze locked forward. He had spent years believing his duty was to stand still. But today, he understood. Sometimes, the smallest movements mean the most. Sometimes, the smallest actions leave the biggest impact. A single moment, a silent acknowledgement, can change someone's life forever. Now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone broke character in the most unexpected but heartfelt way? Maybe it was a soldier, a teacher, or even a stranger. Someone who reminded you that even in the most disciplined roles, there is still a human heart beating underneath. Tell us your story in the comments below. Where are you watching from? What part of this story resonated with you the most? We love reading your thoughts and sharing in these powerful moments together. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another one like it. We have an incredible story coming tomorrow, one that will remind you just how powerful human connection can be. You won't want to miss it. Now, take a moment, share your thoughts, and join the conversation. Because in the end, stories like this remind us all of what truly matters. We can't wait to hear from you.